Caitlin. I started the recording.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon. This is Caitlin Davidson. I just wanted to confirm you guys can hear us okay and see the screen. Gary, can you hear me okay?
Yes. When I hesitate, it's because it takes me a while to unmute.
Okay.
Okay. And Frank Browen says he can hear us. So
okay, perfect. Perfect. We'll give it a couple minutes. Just I see we still have people joining.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for answering the question. I'm seeing that a lot of you answered on the question and answer. Appreciate that. And anytime you want to communicate with us, you can do it via the question tab. So it doesn't even have to be a question.
Gary, you want to give it a few more minutes, or should we get started now?
I think we should get started now. I'll let you start. All right.
Sure. So we have around 34 people on the line, which is great. Thanks again for joining us today for this statewide access management coordination go-to webinar. This should be a pretty good call. We're excited to have our two speakers on the line as well. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Gary Sokolow to introduce our staff and panelists.
Okay. Thank you. Today we have Caitlin. I don't know if Caitlin has participated in any of these staff webinars. She has in some of our training webinars, and I welcome her, and it's really nice to have her helping me out. Gina Bognani is on board here, as well as myself, and our two speakers today are Tony Lau and Rod McDaniels. Rod McDaniels is with the Utah DOT. Tony Lau used to be with the Utah DOT when I heard this presentation, and he is now working for Salt Lake Aviation. I'm sorry, Tony. Could you unmute and tell me the exact name of where you're working?
I'm with the Salt Lake City Department of Airports.
All right, thank you. Thank you. The presentation that you will hear today was something I heard in South Africa when Tony and I were there. And for those of you with DOT, I paid for everything myself, and I use vacation time. And Tony gave this presentation on permitting, which amongst our access management conferences, most of the time it really is about more of the science of access management, the traffic operations side of access management, design, not very often on the actual permitting portion. And Tony gave this wonderful presentation, very out of the ordinary, on how they've made recommendations to improve the efficiency of permitting in the state of Utah. And Rod McDaniels is now the main person for access management permitting in Utah. And both of them have worked together on improving their operations. And frankly, I didn't take good enough notes when he was giving him the presentation, so I was hoping I could take better notes this time. Speaking of notes, the handout should be on your control panel under where it says handouts, 1 of 5. And so you can take that, and or you can wait until we do the summary of the meeting. So next slide. All right, just a plug for us here, usually the 4th Tuesday, 2:30 Eastern Time, 1:30 Central Time. We discuss all issues that might be relevant to DOT staff that work with access management, trip generation, site impact. I know that there's more, but those are the 3 general areas. Okay, next. All right. Could you give me keyboard and mouse control, because this is a multi-phase. I'd just be Caitlin, if you just put the cursor over my name. And,
I see. Yeah. I thought you did have it. Hold on, I'll give it back.
No, I think you have to give it to me. But
okay.
That's not true. Maybe I can do it myself. All right.
It says you have it.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. So you have this control panel that looks similar to this, and it folds up like that, and you can unfold it, and you are automatically on mute, and the audio setup is, obviously, if you can hear, you've already done that. The question control panel is there, and if you are on the telephone and actually want to speak to us, we can unmute you. If you are on if you have a microphone and want to speak, we can unmute you also. Just ask us to do that. All right. Okay, and then you can also raise your hand, and we'll occasionally ask a question like that. Okay, so we will be answering questions throughout the webinar, and so just wanted you to know that too. And we've already had our introductions. We're going to have the presentation on Utah's permit processing, and if we have time, we can also discuss things of interest to us in our work with the districts. But we'll see. We'll see how much time we have. With that, I would like to pass the control back to Caitlin, and Caitlin, do you have control again?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So with that, Rod and Tony, please let us know when to advance the slides.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name's Tony Lau. I have Rod McDaniels with me, and together we're going to tell you a little bit about how we've worked with our access management program here in Utah. The slide was something that we put together for our friends down in South Africa. They don't ever see snow. We don't see it quite like this in May, but I don't know, maybe some days there's some places in Florida that maybe you guys see snow like this once in a lifetime. I appreciate that kind introduction that Gary gave me. When I went to South Africa, like Gary, my DOT had no input financially or otherwise as to whether or not I went, so it was completely extracurricular for me and my family. We turned it into a mini vacation, but nevertheless, I'm glad that Gary was able to see the presentation and invite both of us to your webinar to talk a little bit more about what we're doing. So let me get right into this, and Caitlin, if you could move to the next slide. Back when our governor was re-elected in 2012, he came out during his 2013 State of the State address, and he challenged everybody in Utah state government to make their entire operation 25% more efficient. So that can mean a million different things. That could mean cut your budgets by 25%. It could mean do 25% more work with the same amount of resources. It could mean some combination of both. It could mean job cuts. So he really left the door open to how each agency in the state would achieve that 25% efficiency. But here at the Utah Department of Transportation, we really wanted to take the approach of let's make our operations more efficient because we didn't want to cut our budgets or our people. So to do that, we really had to get into some theory about what we were going to do. And around the department, we picked 5 different areas. Part of it revolved around construction contracts and change orders and all other kinds of fun things. But the one that really excited us was we had received quite a few complaints from developers over the years at the director level about their permits taking 6 months, 9 months, 12 months to go through. And so as a department, our leadership said, why don't we try to make our access permitting process more efficient? So as we were given this challenge as a team, Rod and we had a couple of very key team players from the governor's office come and help guide us and shepherd us through this process to make everything more efficient. And to do that and really set the background for what we did, I need to get into something called the theory of constraints. So Caitlin, if you could go to the next slide, please. The theory of constraint really talks, and if I break it down into its most simplest form, it's really all about widgets. So let's say that I want to make a widget and it takes me 5 steps to get there. We'll call them A, B, C, D, and E. And I can produce these widgets and I could do this step in the process at those varying rates that you see on the screen. Really, we can build quite a few widgets every hour from these varying steps, but ultimately our system is going to be constrained by that step C at 10 units per hour. So Caitlin, could you move to the next slide? Next slide. Okay, thank you. So our critical activity is this 10 units per hour. So it doesn't matter if widget maker A can do 20 an hour and widget maker E can do 18. They're going to pile up on widget maker C's desk, right? He's going to have a backlog of them coming in. and just as soon as he kicks it out, D&E are going to take care of things. So our throughput is really defined by this critical activity, and that's what we're going to talk more about today. So key points are there on the screen. I'm going to try not to read all of those for you. Gary said that they're in the handout, and I'm happy to talk to any of you offline about that. But when we talk about the critical activity, that's really what we're really honing in and focusing on, and that's really what we used in Utah to figure this out. Can you move to the next slide, please? So talking a little bit more about this, just want to show you a different way. If we have a chain and we have 3 links of various strengths, 10, 20, and 50 kilograms, I can put all the effort and resources I want into that bottom link, that 50 kilogram link. And I can make it hold 100 kilograms, I can make it hold 1,000 kilograms. But really the only link that I can focus on to make that chain any stronger is going to be that top link. So that's just another way of looking at the same critical activity. So as we think about these things, that's really how we went into this process, and we really wrapped our minds around what do we want to do in Utah. So if you can move to the next slide. I shamelessly borrowed this story from our great folks at the governor's office, and I guess it's a relatively well-known theory of constraint story, and maybe some of you guys have already heard it, but we're going to talk a little bit about blue light. And the way this story goes is there's a young productivity consultant, and he's sent to a factory to help these factory workers make their operation more efficient. And once he gets to the factory, he's met there by the factory plant manager, the floor manager, and he says, my factory is the most efficient factory out there. I'm running at 93% efficiency, and there's nothing that you can tell me that's going to make anything better. And this young guy, right, he doesn't know much about anything other than he's went to all these classes in college, and he goes, well, you know what, I was sent here, this is my job, I've been told to come here and look at this, will you at least show me around? He goes, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do, but let me take you around. So as they're walking through the plant, they were actually looking at everything and goes, you know what, this plant, we produce these big bumpers for our semi-trucks, and we're working faster and more efficient than we ever have before. And we're about to double these welding bays here, and we'll go from 3 bays to 6 bays, and that's really going to make it so that we can get these things out of here and make tons of money on all of these trucks that we're selling, because they're all going to have these great bumpers. And the young consultant, he thought in his head, he goes, well, if we're going to double our welding bays, I need to know what good looks like. So in his head, he thought, well, if I've got welders, what should welders be doing? Well, their welding equipment should be on, and when their welding equipment is on, you should see this faint blue light all throughout the factory. So he said, the more blue light I see, the better this factory is doing. So as they walked by the welding bays, the plant manager said, okay, check out how busy these guys are. And he looks at one of the welding operators, and he's off and he's welding a bumper, and he gets done with his bumper, he takes off his equipment, and he walks to the guy next to him in the next bay, taps him on the shoulder, he takes off his equipment, they walk over, they pick up the bumper, they carry it over to a pallet of finished bumpers, then they kind of both go back to their own bays, and the welder, he puts the next bumper up on his table, he peels the plastic back off the bumper, gets it set on his table, hooks up his clamps, and he starts welding again. So after doing this, he sees that this whole process takes about 20 minutes per bumper, and yet he's only welding for about 30 seconds of that time. And this productivity consultant's like, wow, talk about room for improvement. Meanwhile, the plant manager's looking at him, and he's smirking, and he's saying, see, I told you these guys were busy. We are just kicking butt in this factory. So as I kind of close this up, you think, okay, how are we going to make this better? So this young consultant, he says, you know what, thank you for your time. You did awesome. I think I have some ideas if you're open to them. and I'll get back to you. So he goes back, he issues his report, he says, look, these guys should be welding, they're not welding. And really, to try this out, he asked for some resources to help out with that. So when it came to, he finally found a college intern that was working in the marketing department. He says, hey, let me borrow him for a month. And the training that this intern received was, you're here to help these welders weld. So when they're done welding their bumpers, I want you to be their assistant. I don't want them to go to the other welders. I want you to help them carry their bumpers over to the finished pallet. I want you to move the pallets around so that the new bumpers are ready to go. And when you're done with all that, I want you to peel back the plastic so they're ready for these guys to weld. Needless to say, after a month of trying this, the plant manager was so enthusiastic about it, he told the company that he didn't need to expand his welding bays anymore. He just needed 3 more guys, just like the intern they gave him. So this is really what we did at UDOT to figure this out. So as we go into this, Rod's going to get into what we actually did at UDOT, and I'll talk more about that. But to kind of close this out, if you move to the next slide, Caitlin, we really have 5 steps in the theory of constraints. So number 1, we need to identify the constraint. In our story, that was the welders welding, right? Anything that they're not doing to weld is hurting our process and it's slowing them down. The second step is exploit the constraint. And by exploiting the constraint, we mean we really need to say everything, and step 2 and 3 kind of go together. We really want to make sure that the constraint is on the highest platform and everything else is secondary to that constraint. And number 4, once we've made everything secondary, we put any resources we have towards improving our system into making that particular constraint better. In this case, they hired more interns to help those welders out. And then the last step, preventing inertia from becoming the constraint. And this is really kind of where this process is cyclical. Once you've helped all those welders, it may not be the welders anymore. Maybe it's your trucking. Maybe it's how fast your ordering department can actually pay for and receive the raw materials for the bumpers. So there's all kinds of things where you go through these processes over and over again, and your organization gets better with this theory. So really that's kind of the approach that we've taken in Utah to making our access process better. And so if I haven't confused you enough already with all this theory, Rod's going to be really straightforward. You're going to love his part of the talk. He's going to tell you what we actually did and show you some of the great improvements that we've made over the last 2 years. Or, well, I guess it's even 4 years now since the governor's given us that edict. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Rod to show you what we've done.
Great, Tony. I appreciate that excellent setup. Can we get to the next slide, please? So this is a workflow diagram. It's a high-level overview of the workflow process that's in the access. It's oriented from left to right. As you can see, the very first thing is access permit need, followed by we have a required pre-application concept meeting, and then it flows from left to right from there. Going over to the right, you have application submittal, 10-day completeness review. And then in the red box in the middle, it's what we call our control point. This is the piece where we got stuck kind of in the cycle. I'd almost call it a Rube Goldberg machine at some point. We found out that our application review folks were really our welders, and they weren't doing a lot of welding. And instead of welding, what they were doing was continuously requesting updates and resubmittals for applications. So we really focused in on this review portion and needed additional information, and then additional information sent. It really identified for us that the weak point in our system was applicant education related, and I think the next couple of slides will show us that a little bit better. But just moving to the right, you can see the permit outcomes after it gets through the process. But just to reiterate, the place that we were stuck and spending a lot of unnecessary time was in this review cycle. If we can go to the next slide, that would be great. So this was a really important part of the analysis for us. We have a color-coded system here, and you can see on the very bottom of the colored chart, We have the how much blue light we estimated that we had at the beginning of the process. Just above that, we have the red bucket, and this is the really the applicant education area. This is the area that we found out that we had the most deficiencies in. And then we have the other two areas. We got the technical issues, and then how many resources that we had available to us. The most significant thing that we learned out of this particular slide was that the applicant education was deficient. And do you have anything to add there, Tony?
Yeah, well, and it was really interesting because as we went into this process and we had identified our workflow, we kept trying to pin this problem on our software. We kept saying, we need more money to develop in-house software. We want more money for this, and really software is where the answer's at. And as we came out of this analysis, you can see that it's really only a small chunk of our problem was software related. We really had a problem with our applicants. They didn't know what to do, where to go, and how to do it. And so it really changed our focus as a state as to where to throw all of our resources and how to attack this problem.
And that's a great point. I think the default tendency is to look at the system and say, hey, if we just invest in the system, pour a lot more money in there, we'll automatically be more efficient. And then we found out that that was really a smaller part of the problem. And I think the next few slides will really help illustrate that. If we could change slides, please. Okay, this is going to be a little bit hard for you guys to see, but on the far left, you'll see a screenshot. It has a little red circle towards the top. That's a screenshot of the totality of what was representing the entire statewide access management program when Tony and I had the opportunity to intervene with this process. And it's going to be hard to see, but the top left document, there was a total of 3 sentences that were purporting to drive and run the entire statewide program. And as Tony mentioned earlier, we would get some bad press saying it takes UDOT forever to issue an access permit. And you go back and you look at the amount of program content that was originally out there, three sentences is entirely deficient for a statewide program. And it created a condition that we identified where there was not a common customer experience across the state. So if you were a statewide developer, when you operated with within one region, you may have a different experience than you did in the other region. And so that's one of the areas where we started in. And just to the right of that first picture, you can see the second one where we significantly increased the amount of content that we were publishing, including standards. On the far right, we also set up some overhaul guidance documents, including a pre-application document. If we could look at the next slide. So on this slide, we further refined the program. We actually developed a formalized variance request form.
Okay, Caitlin, can we go back a slide?
Okay, right here. So we developed a variance request form. In the before condition, there was no significant documentation there. These forms were all built offline on PDFs, and our system already had the capability for us to upload completed PDF documents, so we were able to roll it into the system without doing massive system rebuilds. So once we had the documents built offline, we could just upload them as required documents. We redesigned the permit. It hadn't been redesigned for what appeared to be about 20 years. And so the middle screenshot's the permit redesigned. And then included with our application process, we built in some checklists, which we also learned was a best practice. Next slide, please. So again, on the left, you can see the before condition of our website. That was pretty much the totality of what we had. And then on the right, you can see the after condition. And this is where we had quite a bit of help from Region 2, which is the area that Tony had oversight and leadership. And he helped us get a hold of actual icon-driven web content versus the before condition on the left. And then we were ultimately able to go back into the system and start splitting out some of the screens to make it more efficient. But the common denominator, the real efficiency tool for us, was to be able to define and describe A, what our workflow was, and B, the process to go through that workflow. Next slide, please. So this is a graph that's produced by our Governor's Office of Management and Budget. It's grafted into our online permit system, and what it's depicting, it's showing the throughput increase on the conditional access permit side. So the top line, the top left-hand side was what we called our baseline, and the information came back that at the baseline, when we initially started measurement in this area, each application was costing us in the neighborhood of $3,000 to process internally. And over the next several years, we had a steady progression line going down, and we were able to condense that cost, and we were actually able to cut it in half. So when we go back to the beginning of the presentation, where with the governor's challenge to increase efficiency and or reduce costs by 25%, we were able to really hit a home run in this area, because in effect our throughput increased to a point where we were handling the applications for a smaller amount of time, which translated into our handling costs being reduced by 50%. And you can see from month to month there's pretty wide swings there. We were a little nervous about it at the beginning, but when you look at it on a longitudinal scale, we have a steady regression line going from that baseline cost per application at $3,000 for internal handling costs down to $1,500. One of the interesting things that we noticed about this, our statewide access management program in Utah is processing 400 applications roughly on an annual basis, and that's relative to our utility encroachment permit program that's processing 10 times that amount. 400 is a relatively small statewide number, and so what we noticed with this type of measurement is that with such a small number, if you missed one or two reviews by the 45-day deadline, it really tends to swing the needle. It's similar to taking a test that maybe has 5 questions on it. You really can't miss very many questions before you get to a failure condition. So that would account for the vertical swings up and down you see. But the
hey, Rod?
Yes.
This is Gary Socolo. The people online are really interested, because this really is almost our language, except there are some differences in what we call certain things. What is a conditional access permit compared to, let's say, another one?
So the conditional access permit is, I would like to call it a legal euphemism. We had some litigation where in the past we had some nomenclature out there where we called our actual permit instrument a grant of access, and evidently in our legal area, the grant of access nomenclature or terminology seemed to have some specific legal conveyance meaning, and so we were encouraged to call all of our access management program permits conditional access permits. So I think it's really the nomenclature. So they're all titled that. We don't issue any permits that aren't without, they all have conditions applied. So that's a little bit of the backstory on how we wound up with that particular name.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that makes sense. I was just wondering if these were only the ones with special conditions, which usually take longer, but your legal staff had convinced you to change the title of what you give to a conditional access permit.
And They did, and what we found out when we received that direction is that between myself and Tony and our counterparts in the other regions, we were previously very successful with our branding of grants of access terminology, what we called our access permit, and we wound up having to go through quite a few documents, the system, the website, and doing a rebrand, so it was a little bit easier said than done, but I recall it constituting quite a bit of busy work just to get the name changed there. But yeah, that's pretty much it in a name.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's a great question. We learned quite a bit in the process, and I think Tony brought out some of the major points in terms of everyone's default thinking tends to center around, hey, you guys absolutely need to rebuild the system and get the latest and greatest COTS-based program to make you more efficient. And we found some other ways to do that, but it sure didn't take a lot of imagination when you go back to the early days where you only had a few lines of program content out there and us scratching our heads trying to understand why there wasn't a common customer experience and things of that nature.
And when we get into the weeds of what we actually did, we did quite a bit of discussion about what actually do our customers want? Who are our customers? Are they land developers that have done 100 permits all throughout the state and they really know what they're doing? Are they really our audience, or is it the single-family homeowner that owns a parcel along the state highway and they're going to build their dream house? Or is it somebody in between, right? Is it a family that's owned property for a long time along the state highway and maybe they're looking to do a little bit more land development and they're trying to build a small shopping center? So we really looked at our audiences to say, what information do we need to get to those people? And then once we've given them that information, what information do the engineers and architects need to prepare that successful application? And so if you browse to our website, our documentation is really geared by audience, and we say, hey, this is the packet that you and your owners and owners representatives need. This is the packet that you need to give to your engineer, because this has all the information that's really geared and really tailored for them. And that really is what I call the secret sauce, at least in Utah, to how we were able to get our costs down from $3,000 per permit back in late 2013 to where we are today, at almost half.
So I think that's there's quite a bit more operational detail, but I think our focus today was to keep it at the how we approach the problem. But one of the takeaways that we picked up was this concept that building offline content that could just be uploaded was a real quick shortcut for us. I think in an ideal world you'd have a parallel system that's built into, but out of necessity we wound up building the content, and that really helped us gain some efficiencies. But exercises like this, where you really have an opportunity to pull up and see what's under the carpet, that's where it's at. And it took quite a bit of good leadership. We have great flexibility in our statewide teams. They've demonstrated consistent capacity to adapt and flex or pivot direction in light of new information. And Tony was really key in those particular areas and helping lead the state. We also discovered some other underlying trends in terms of, it seemed like once we were able to get a couple of the regions on board, we'd almost hit a tipping point and everybody else would just come with us. And so those were some of the strategies that we applied. And the chart that you're looking at, it's a fairly automated chart. It actually comes out of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. So it's highly reproducible, and it's not something that we're able to go hands-on and manipulate the data to our favor. So there's a little bit of distance there, and that helps us get reliable results, so we're not unnecessarily tipping the scales. And I think we're pretty close.
Yeah.
Pretty close to the end of our overview here.
Now is the fun time for question and answer. As I said, I knew that there would be a lot of this because you are speaking the language of the people online. That they know exactly what you're talking about. And so the first question I had is from Victor Lupiccolo from our 5th District in Central Florida. And his question is, are your reviews handled electronically? Do you ever resort to paper reviews?
Gary, I'm happy to answer that. This is Tony. All of our forms are submitted electronically. We do have in-house software, as we didn't explain, but you guys could probably infer from some of the things that we were talking about. Our applicants fill out some online forms. They actually submit all of their plans and requests electronically. So we have PDFs of everything, which is great for documentation purposes. And then we actually, once we get those applications, we do print them and review them on paper. I know in my office, we actually had a comment resolution form that went out to all the different disciplines, and we'd gather up comments and present those back to the applicants to resolve before we would issue a permit. But all in all, the back and forth, we would submit comments back to the applicant, and they would see this as a completely paperless process. So no bringing in 8 hard copies of 24 by 36 plans to get a permit from the state. And our customers have loved not having to print out copies for us.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, so our online permit system is a statewide electronic platform. It does all the standard things in a modern system in terms of being an electronic payment portal, a document archive, and it's in a uniform use across the country. And I see another question here. How do you get the information about customer education being the critical constraint? And maybe I could speak a little bit to that. One of the things I think we mentioned that we had seen an article that came out in the media that in one of our regions that said UDOT takes forever to issue an access permit. Our executive directors and executive leadership took a look at that article. I call stuff like that a black eye, because once an article comes out like that, it's really difficult to unring the bell, and in traditional print media, you don't really have an opportunity to put in really a counter word on what's going on or what's not going on. Our executive leaders asked a pretty reasonable question. They're like, well, how long does it take to get an access permit, and show us some of your stats and things of that nature. Let's see your inputs, outputs, throughputs, things of that nature. And so in terms of how we arrived at an understanding that applicant education was a problem, I think it originated out of this idea that we were continuously in the review cycle, almost invariably, no matter what an applicant submitted to the department, we would go back with 20 questions and ask for a resubmittal. Hey, no, we need this, we need that, we need another document. And that really put a lot of fingers pointing at that we hadn't done the best job possible of defining the process in advance. Another thing that Tony and I picked up along the way, which seems to be true in any permitting or regulatory programs, is that it's critically important to set expectations in advance, which is really difficult to do if you don't have the information published ahead of time. So setting those expectations is a really critical thing to make sure that folks, you can inform them ahead of time, and that's one area where we were really able to make quite a bit of progress.
So, Frank, it's good to see your question. Let me just add to Rod's answer is these answers didn't just happen quickly. I mean, I know we rushed through it and we talked stories and examples and theory and what we did, and we did that all in about 45 minutes. But really, this process took several day-long workshops over several months. So we would meet, we would workshop, we'd go back with assignments and homework, we'd think about things, we'd come back, we'd talk some more, and it was really a process to get to this applicant education. And it was kind of magic as these answers started coming, because through these workshops we said, okay, this is your blue light. Your blue light is your experts reviewing this information and getting to a decision. And as we started figuring out what was holding us back from issuing a yes on the very first try, it came out that, well, software is not going to help us get a yes on the very first try. So we were really, it was really just kind of magic how these answers came out. And when we pulled it all together, we could finally see the forest through the trees, and we saw that really we weren't doing a very good job of telling any of our applicants what they needed to give us.
Thank you. I got you're speaking directly to something that Frank Browen and Gina Bugnani of our office are working on right now. And one of the things that we're working on is a brochure specifically for applicants that can be customized for each district. And Caitlin, if you could give me, make me a presenter.
1 second. Let's see.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, this is one of the drafts that we have on the driveway permitting, and we're far from over here, but your talk has given me a lot of ideas, and that is to ask many of you that are on the line, what are the questions that you keep getting? What are the pieces of information that our applicants consistently leave off of their packages, their application packages? And as I said, Frank and Gina have been working on this, and if you are interested, Florida DOT people, in having an impact on what's in this, then let us know, because we're at the beginning here, and this draft here was customized for the District 4 area, or at least the portion down below, which we actually put the phone numbers and addresses. So we're still at the beginning of this, but it would be so much better if we heard from you about what should be on this. And so I really appreciate that our speakers talked about that. Okay, I can give up my oh, Caitlin, I'm making you the presenter again. I have a few questions, Gary. When you discovered that, and I'm thinking of that, Caitlin, could you go back to the bar chart? The one. Yeah. How did you determine these percentages?
So this is Rod McDaniels. I'll share a little bit. We went through a process like Tony mentioned, and we developed an interference diagram, and we really took a look at what good would look like. So what would a perfect scenario look like? And I think some of the input that we picked up in that process was Good would look like educate the applicants one time. They come in and they're really informed, you know, and then also from the technical side, what would look good?
Right. So as you look at some of these interferences are really anything that keeps our access management professionals from reviewing and effectively issuing permits. So we had things like no or poor instructions, no checklists. So that would cause problems like an applicant wouldn't label the distance from the driveway they're proposing to the nearest driveway or street on either side. Technical issues would be, you know, some issues with the customers getting their documents to us electronically. On the resource side, you know, if we needed to send something off to one of our structural engineers, right, it may take 2 or 3 days or a week to get through our structures division to get review there, or not having access to software programmers when we had bugs in the system. So those were all things that kept us from doing our core job of reviewing applications. And so as you guys go through this process in Florida, and it looks like Frank and Gary and his team, you guys have a great handle on this. You guys are doing some great things. I can see it just from the way those handouts that Gary showed look. It really would, you know, we would recommend from our side, go through that. What does Florida want to be doing with their time? What do you guys want to do as you process your permits? And what causes those problems? I mean, Gary said, what kind of questions do you get from your customers? I'm sure you get a million questions about medians and how do we deal with medians, and can we cut a turn pocket into the median here or there? That's something that I'm very jealous of in Utah. I wish I had as many medians up here as you guys have down there. But those are things that we went through.
I appreciate that call out on our medians. And so what I venture to say is what you've done in Utah, if we were to do a time chart on how our welders, let's say, what keeps them from welding, it would be very similar to what you found. Except we got a situation where we don't even have electronic permitting yet. That is, it is supposed to be coming out later this summer. And they started, and I believe it's been successful with utility permitting, but sometime July, August, September, they're supposed to be rolling out electronic application and permitting. So we could probably learn a lot from you also in that way. The other thing I wanted to point out that I heard is that you said Region 2, which Rod, you used to be a manager there, was a leader in getting some of this done, correct?
Well, technically, Tony and I were counterparts. So Tony had operational and leadership oversight for region operations, and I'm kind of the centralized program manager / coordinator for all of our statewide permitting programs. So in that capacity, yeah, we pretty much made a really great team. I wanted to mention quickly, we didn't go into a lot of detail on our online permit system, but being able to borrow some of Tony's expertise that he was able to bring into the operational environment, our online permit system has been deployed since 2003, so it's a little over 14 years old. With Tony's help, we were able to look at our actual online permit system workflow, and we were able to slay quite a few sacred cows. We had about 24 steps, workflow steps in total in our handoffs and online permit system. we were able to more than cut that in half. I believe today we have a total of 11 differentiated workflow steps in the online permit system, and that's for the 3 statewide permitting programs that are facilitated through the online permit system. So that may be an area where we can exchange some future notes. We didn't build in that depth into this particular presentation, but we were able to really streamline in that area once we did get around to looking at our system itself. But that was, much of that was after we went through the theory of constraints model. And once we cleaned our house up on the process side and got our documentation in order, we were able to redirect our energies towards that system. And that might be for another discussion, but we'd be happy to share that with you. And I just wanted to add to Tony's comments, your guys' developing brochure looks really very nice, and we'd certainly love to get a copy of that.
Yeah. And Gary, just to add, you guys seem to be doing this in the right order. Process first, software second, because Rod said our system was deployed 2003, and nobody's process ever changes 14 years later, right? That's perfect. Making sure we had the right process in place first before going to our programmers and saying, hey, these are the software changes that we want, really gave us a really good design that our programmers could take and actually implement. And so that was really one of the keys that we took away from our system updates that we did, and hopefully that you guys have been able to provide good key insight as to how your process works so that your software can work for you instead of you working for your software.
Well, let me ask you, the software that you're using, was it developed in-house?
It is. It was completely developed in-house. It's an old Oracle platform that we've kind of merged with a newer Oracle platform, so it's a completely in-house designed thing, and we have a software programmer that's been helping us now for a couple of years, and he's actually done some really great things for us.
And Tony's exactly right. The going through this constraints modeling and sharpening our own pencils and tools really led the way to being more efficient on the system side. I mean, the system deficiencies were always part of the picture. It just initially, when you only have 3 sentences describing your whole statewide program, that's not the logical starting point.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Victor, do you have a question you would like to ask? I see that your hand is up and I've unmuted you. Sometimes people put them up by accident. But Victor? Okay. I guess that was just a mistake. But the point I wanted to make about your region is that I've been dealing with this program since 1988, and I have to admit that our process really didn't start in Tallahassee, and our program didn't start in Tallahassee, that we had a number of districts that were already instituting access management. Our southeast section, our central Florida section, and part of our southwest section already had good access management informal programs, and without a doubt we stole from them. And I think many times the knowledge really comes bottom up in places like this, and that's why I will put out the call for those of you online to let us know as we prepare educational materials what needs to be on it. Matter of fact, Frank Broen has suggested that one of our future webinars be just about discussing this brochure. So I think that might even be a good next one, because we do have we've had input from District 4, and District 3, and we would really like to hear from more. And really, again, Tony and Rod, great presentation. I never thought that a discussion about widgets would ever be interesting to me, but it definitely turned out to be one of the best and most interesting presentations on permitting I've ever heard, or access management that I've ever seen. And I'll also put in a plug in for the 3-minute Utah Why Are Medians So Good video that we stole from you and took out the mountains and added Florida to it, but we did praise you at the end for allowing us to steal it. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll let you know. We have the video. Okay, those are the end. It's the end of my questions, and I don't see any more questions coming in. So, Caitlin.
All right, I think we're good to go. Here is all of our emails. If you have any additional questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us directly. But I think that does it. Thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Very good. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.